Good afternoon, and welcome to session 4 of Chair Bekaert's 2022 Tax Credits and Incentives virtual conference. This session is a guide to New Markets Tax Credit. We can spend some time for questions and answers at the end. For those of you who haven't tuned in previously, my name is Marty Kehrman. I lead Chair Bekaert's Tax Credits and Incentives Advisory Group. And it is great just when you see the people who are signing in that we've had a number of people who've been here all day. So thank you so much for taking the time to participate. We have a variety of sessions today, 4 in total, as I mentioned, and we are offering up to 1 hour of CPE per session. We just wrapped up the session on cost segregation studies and energy credits, and we're going to jump into our next and final session of the day, which is a guide to New Markets Tax Credit. As I mentioned, I want to introduce you to our main speaker today. Laurel Tinsley, Managing Director of the Tax Advantage Group at Cherry Bekaert, what I like to call the New Markets Tax Credit Group. And we're also going to have Ron Wainwright and Dan Mennel, my partners from the Tax Credits and Incentive Advisory Group, in the sessions for Q&A toward the end of the conference. But with that, I will kick it over to Laurel and take it away.
Thank you, Marty. Welcome, everyone. Just start with a brief overview of who is the Tax Advantage Group, what do we do? And then we'll kick it into New Market Tax Credit. So as Marty said, we help a lot of different organizations with New Market Tax Credits, but we are a little bit broader than that in that we are sort of development incentive focused for raising, deploying, and managing capital in a more generalized sense. One of those forms of capital that we're going to focus on today is New Market Tax Credits, and that is a bulk of what work we do. But we also apply for allocation of New Market Tax Credits and other different types of federal funding programs. We help people with deploying capital, including state tax credit funding and historic tax credits, worked with the solar and other types of programs as well. And we then manage that capital for different organizations, from the projects that receive that funding to the community development entities who've given the funding to different projects. And we also work with investors to manage some of their entities when needed. So we have done the full spectrum of that. And when we raise, manage, and deploy, and we've gotten done with the deploying, we then go out and raise some more. So we've created, with all the work we've done over the years, over 15, I think that number is higher now. I think I've seen 15,000 direct jobs, but our number there is 14,484. So we've continued to grow and support different organizations in seeking capital and then deploying capital as they've acquired that either from the government or from a different community development entity. We also, I'm the operating officer of the INNOVATEFUND. That is a community development entity. That is the kind of entity that goes and gets funding from the CDFI fund for New Market Tax Credits and other types of funding sources. That entity has received over 238 million of allocation, and we have a service area of 4 states: South Carolina, North Carolina, Georgia, and Tennessee. Those types of entities, community development entities, have service areas. Some of them are national, so they cover all 50 states and this territory, so Puerto Rico and the islands. But different entities have different service areas, so that would be ours. This is sort of us in a snapshot, just to give you a sense of sort of telegraphing what we're going to talk about later. Different community development entities have different focuses. So some of them work in different regions, some of them focus on different types of funding. And so that is part of the waterfront of community development entities, is they each have their own focus. What do they fund and where do they work? That will be in your packet. I would assume that most of you that are on the phone today are here for a couple of reasons, and we'll get to that in a poll question. But one of those is perhaps you need CPE. And if you do, just ride along with us. If what you're here for, though, is to figure out whether New Market Tax Credits could be a way to solve the delta in your project, you have a gap that you need to fill, or you just were looking for different types of funding for different kinds of activities, the first way to see if you might fit is to see different organizations we've funded. So we'll just go through a few project samples. Swiss Krono is one of those industrial manufacturing projects. So there's all sorts of different types of projects that get funded through here. We've got, this is a capital project we raised with SunTrust, worked on that project. The next one in this slide stack is a mixed use facility that had both an urban grocery store, affordable housing units, and created some jobs. The next one in your capital stack is focused on healthcare. So Grady Hospital, Grady Hospital Center, they had 4 different rounds of new market funding for different parts of their facilities. This one was for the surgical services piece. We've also done a Grady Hospital with their AIDS center, and so the Pond Center for them. They've used the program and found it so helpful they came back again. The next one of the slides is also, I believe this one is a non-metro facility that is also in the Appalachian Regional Distress Community. So you can see there's a lot of different low-income community indicators there, and the project was funded with new market tax credits and other funding sources. The last one, I think, in our slide deck is the YMCA. This is a more generalized facility with recreation. Some of the YMCAs have also early Head Start and different types of community outreach programs. So there's a lot of different ways that projects access this and different types of projects that have received funding. So what are new market tax credits? Just a generalized basic. We're doing sort of a 101 at the start, and we can get deeper, but I think it helps you to understand some of the basics before we get too deep into the minutia. So new market tax credits are a program designed by the government to help bring access to funding to communities that typically lacked access to traditional capital sources. So what does that mean? They are in a low-income community, and so their loan-to-value ratios may have been off, or they are other types of communities that have lacked access to particular types of capital. They are often real estate financings or equipment financing, but we have also done operating business financing. So what does that mean? If you have a business and you're trying to take it to the next step, you have at least $5 million of sources that you need filled, and you have a lot of your funding identified, but you have that last little gap. 5 million is sort of the small end of the spectrum. There are some different loan funds that will fund even smaller than that, but the typical traditional standalone financing comes at that 5 million plus of capital. So you have a real estate project where you are going to build a new facility. You either have a facility where you have a new line you want to add to your current manufacturing and you don't have all the capital, or you want to access operating business financing and really fill that capital stack for just continuing to grow out your operations. You have to be in a low-income community or benefit the low-income community. And what does that mean, really? So that means you're going to either create jobs that are accessible to the low-income community, or you're going to create benefits that go into the community. So those are the sort of main capital pieces that you have to put together a project. The next slide is our polling question. So we may not have told you quite enough for you to be able to answer this yet, but the basic question that's up for you all is, has your organization explored new market tax credits? Yes, you've done it, and you've already done it before, and you're here for the CPE maybe, or you're here just to get a refresher. Yes, you've started, but you probably need a little bit of help or guidance. No, but maybe we would like to understand more and get some more information, or no, this doesn't apply. That one's probably best rephrased as, no, I just need CPE credits, so I'm hanging out with you for the next 40 minutes. And then unsure. So there are the answers. So no, but we would like to know more is a big winner, but also a lot of you think maybe this doesn't apply. Well, hopefully we will be able to change your mind as we go along, but let's see what comes next. So if you were to use new market tax credits, what does it do for you? So you have been raising capital for your project. You either have equity or you're a nonprofit and you've been doing a capital campaign. You're a manufacturing facility and you want to add another line and you have maxed out all of your traditional sources of capital, you've gone to your bank partners, you've gone to your equity partners, and you've maxed that out and you still have a gap. That happens a lot more than you'd think right now with all of the inflation that's going on. So more that people than used to answer this question are saying yes. Oh my gosh, the prices for construction have gone up 27% in the last year to date. Yes, I have a gap in my capital stack, and I didn't used to have one before. So new market tax credit proceeds can fill 15 to 20% of that capital stack. You have to pair it with the additional capital. So you have to have money in hand to leverage through the structure, and we'll show you what that looks like in a little bit. But that money has to be in hand and available. So if you are filling the capital stack with pledges or campaign dollars or equity or traditional debt financing from a bank, you have to be able to access that funding on day one for the financing to work. And then the benefits of flexible terms really come to the project as far as you can have this new market tax credit debt be subordinated to other lenders. It has a low interest rate. It's some people call it buying down your interest rate with the new market subsidy. And also then at the end of the term of 7 years, a part of that new market tax credit capital is left with the project. This is the math. So this often piques a lot of the finance people. This is where some people start to think maybe they're changing their answer from no, I don't really need to know more about this, to maybe I do want to know a little bit more. If you have a $10 million project, the new market tax credit is 39%. That tax credit does not go to the project like some other projects or typical types of tax credits. It's not an R&D credit that is to the company. That tax credit goes to the equity investor in the project. Just to hover over it, it creates with a 75% pricing, it creates about $3 million of capital, but there are costs. So there are costs associated with the structure, and that leaves a net benefit of about $1.5 to $2 million in your project. So then we can move on, talk about the types of impacts. So I mentioned in order for you to be eligible for the tax credit program, there has to be some sort of impact that's going to the project. Into the low-income community. So there are different types of impacts that are created. Industrial manufacturing projects typically create a large amount of jobs, both in metro and non-metro areas. And often these low-income communities, while there is a very high amount of there's a low unemployment rate now, there's still a high amount of unemployment in some of our traditionally low-income communities. So that is still a need for some projects. Real estate and construction projects also can be very large job creators. Government facilities and healthcare and nonprofits often aren't measured on that same impact scale. They're not necessarily creating a large number of jobs, but they are bringing other types of benefits to the community that often are missing. So charter schools, workforce development programs, financing, education. Healthcare is often one of those big gaps in low-income communities. So creating access to healthcare, a lot of the low-income communities are medically underserved areas. So if you are bringing back healthcare programs into medically underserved areas, that's a great community service for the program. And then there's the generalized nonprofits of the world that bring all sorts of other types of community goods and services into the communities that are lacking those. So this one should be a softball for all of you. Hopefully we will get through this pretty quickly and you guys all know the answer. Which of these are new market tax credit community impacts? So is it creating living wage jobs, delivering medical services to medically underserved communities, childcare services, or all of the above? When we are looking at what is missing in a community, I'll hover over this while we get some additional people voting. We'll keep the poll open until everybody has voted. One of the things to think about is that not all low-income communities are built alike. Obviously, some communities are, as I said, still suffering from high unemployment. But if there's a low-income community and the unemployment isn't a big issue for them, what are they missing? Are they missing access to medical services? Are they missing educational components of their community? What is the key component that's missing from that community to make it more holistic to make it operate and function better. And I believe we'll be seeing the results soon. Oh, yay, 93%. So the answer is all of the above. So yes, the low income jobs is important, but there's also a lot of other community impacts we can highlight. So this is, people used to start with this diagram, and I think a lot more people said, no, I don't want to know more when you start with this as your beginning slide. It's called spaghetti, and it's called the leverage structure. What it basically means is that you can bring in your traditional sources. They can either be bank loans, equity, or grants into the structure to leverage against that 39% credit. So then we have a new market tax credit investor. They are traditionally banks like US Bank, Capital One, Chase. All the traditional banks have a tax credit investor arm, and they pair that new market tax credit equity with your traditional sources of financing, mix it together into the investment fund, and then drop it down in the community development entity. When you make an investment from the investment fund into a community development entity, that's called a qualified equity investment. And that is the investment that generates that 39% credit. The CDFI fund is the arm of the government that awards community development entities the funding capital allocation of new market tax credits. And so the community development entity has to have an award of those credits in order to generate that credit to the equity investor. Community development entities will hover over a little bit later in the presentation, but they are the entities that really, again, have that mission. They have a service area they function, they serve, whether it be state, local, or national, and they have a particular type of funding that they're looking for. So then they make their investment into a business or real estate project. They either provide an operating business loan, cash flow loan, equipment financing, or real estate loan. And that is the basics of the new market tax credit that generates the 39% credit over 7 years. And that is the spaghetti structure. So then how do we get, we've started with the bottom where most of you may be seeing yourself, the project that needs funding. How do we get that funding? Who are the people that are providing that funding? Those are the community development entities, the CDEs. So we are talking about entities that have been working in low-income communities. They have at least 60% of their activities in low-income communities, but most of them have about 100% of their activities in low-income communities. They are certified by the CDFI fund. They can either be a CDE, which is a community development entity, or they can be a CDFI, which is a different version of that. But either one of those organizations has to be certified by the CDFI fund, which is a division of the Treasury. They, by statute, must be for-profit entities, even though they can have their parent be a nonprofit. They can be affiliated with different types of organizations. So because I said they are working in the low-income community, they're often affiliated with nonprofits that have deep mission work within communities and wanted to have this additional capital stack filler in their portfolio when they wanted to be able to move projects forward in their community. And so they accessed this type of funding. They could be banks that have witnessed the impact of these types of programs and wanted to have this as in their toolbox, or government agencies. That's where a lot of the local regional entities have been formed. There's a city that has realized this is a great filler for their capital stacks for their projects to move them forward, and they have gone and sought funding. So then that's fine, we can move forward. How does it work? So as I mentioned, it's competitive. It's competitive all around. So the CDEs have to write a competitive application to the CDFI fund. After they have been certified, that's just step one. Then they have to build that portfolio. They have to look at what their track record of projects is, how have they served the low-income community. That's how they sort of get their mission and vision. Where are they serving? So their service areas defined by where they have already been working. And what have they been doing? So they have to define their mission, vision, and values. They then have to write that application that wins. After they win, they have to build a pipeline. They look at what they've already funded, and then that has to match with where they're going and what kinds of projects then match that historical track record. CDEs look for entities within their service area that want to get funding, either those manufacturing facilities, they're not nonprofits that are looking for filling that last gap funding. And then they look for entities that also have a lot of their capital stack already full. So if you have a $10 million project and you need 8, you're not a very good candidate for new market tax credits, or at least not yet. Once you've filled that capital stack very close, you're at that 7 million plus range, you're within striking distance of getting new market tax credits. You have to find what are the other traditional sources of capital, what are your bank loans, your equity investors, your other types of capital, campaign donations. Those have to be accessible and ready, or you have to get a bridge funding to bring that to the table for the closing. Once all those pieces are in play, then we're ready to close your financial structure. The first 3 steps in this program typically take about 6 months, maybe, for each one of them. The CDEs work on an annual funding cycle with the government. They build their pipeline every year. And then as you're thinking about accessing the program, if you tell a CDE in advance and they can put you in their pipeline to get what money, then you have gotten a leg up, so that when you're ready for funding the next year and they get awarded the money, they're more likely to fund you because you helped them get the funding. So that's great. What if you just find out now that you have a gap in your capital stack and you didn't know? Then it's really about being ready when the awards are announced. So that is looking like for this year, we should have our announcement of the next round in the fall. So anytime from that September, October, November timeframe, they will announce the next round. And if your project is ready to go and you have all your capital ready, then we can help you with closing your financial structure, or you can go access, go pitch all the CDEs that would serve your area and seek the funding. So this one is one of those that hopefully you heard as I was going through this. Who delegates the new market tax credit allocation to this community development entities? Is it the Department of Labor? Is it the CDFI fund, the USDA, or HUD? So this one should hopefully be a pretty easy one, but whether you get it right or wrong, the good news for you is that you still get credit as long as you answer. So we'll wait for Maddie to tell us all of the answers are in. We're closing the poll now, and good, 69% of you got that right. The Department of Labor, USDA, and HUD are not directly related to the CDFI fund issuance of allocation of authority to CDEs, but they sometimes play in our projects. So they do provide different types of funding, just not the new market tax credit program. So there's good and then there's great. So what makes an ideal project an ideal project? So we've talked about you have to be located in a low income community. These are sort of the basics. You have to have a census tract. It has to be a low income community. It has to be high distress. The community impact has to be significant. You have to need the subsidy. So if you have all of your funding available and you don't really need the tradition, you don't have this lack of access, then most CDEs won't be interested in funding the project, because they're really tasked with finding projects that need this to move forward, not just a project that could get their capital stack filled otherwise. And then again, I mentioned timing already, but this is a big one to hover over again. If you're really ready to go when the allocations are announced, that is ideal, because you need to have all the other sources of capital available to funnel through that structure. Remember our little spaghetti structure that we talked about with all the boxes, and you come out at the bottom with money. You have to have that 70% available at the type of funding to access the new market tax credit, which is typically about that 30%. Then what makes an ideal project? Layer on that this is a competitive program. So the community development entities typically are asking for 3 to 4 times the allocation that's available to get every year. So there are as many people in that bracket of not winning as win allocation that have asked for it. And in order to stay in that top winning circle, you have to have projects that have significant impacts, not just a few jobs and then say we've created jobs. We're talking about significant number of jobs. So typically we like to see for job creation, maybe 10 jobs per million or 100 jobs for $10 million. The completed capital stack. So if you are, again, in that realm of you've got $2 or $3 million committed, but you need a $10 million project financed, you would be in line for a pipeline project. So put your name in the ring for getting somebody an allocation from the CDFI fund, so that when you get the rest of your capital pulled together, you would be eligible for the new markets, but you have to have all those other funding sources in place first. There are a couple other statutory and or program sort of highlights. So the CDFI fund found that there were several states that were not getting access to this program as much as others. And so they create a list. In every allocation round, there are 10 states identified that have traditionally had fewer dollars allocated to their low-income communities than others, and those get on the list. So that list changes. For example, California, for the first time ever, was on the list for the next round. It's not been there before. There are states that have come on recently, like North Carolina, that were not on before. States that were on have come off. So Alabama has been on and then off. And then there are some that have been there for a long time and probably will stay there. So Florida and Texas are some of the states that, because of their very large amounts of population and their large amounts of low-income communities, they will probably stay on the list for a good amount of time. Non-metro really is different than saying rural. You may be able to drive out of a city and think you're in a rural community, but if you're still part of that metropolitan area, as a metropolitan statistical area, you would not qualify for non-metro. So that's a specific designation. And for those non-metro communities that are also really lacking access to capital, there is a sort of priority point for entities, community development entities that will serve non-metro communities. And so there is money set aside each round for specifically deploying into those non-metro communities. Great. So we are at our, I think, last polling question. So you're in the home stretch. We are trying to think about, again, what makes an ideal project? What is the best of the best? What is more likely to get allocation? The $7 million investment in a low-income community, an investment that creates a significant amount of measurable community impacts, or a project that has all other sources of capital committed, but needs the new market tax credit subsidy to complete their financing stack, or all of the above. So we'll wait for Maddie to tell us everybody has voted. We are about at the halfway mark, and so we've only got a few more minutes of the program for specifically on community development entities and new market tax credits. And this is great. 82% of you understood that all of those things make an ideal project. All of these things are important. Having, you know, about a $7 million investment in a low-income community, creating impacts, and having all those other sources. But if you have all of it, then that's the best. So this is the 2021 list of states, just to give you a sample of, I mentioned California was recently added, and North Carolina's in that list as well. Arizona comes in and out, and so do some of the other states, but Texas and Florida are almost always, and Tennessee are almost always on that list. Non-metro are really those non-metropolitan statistical areas, not just rural outside of a city, but not in the metropolitan statistical area. Those are sort of those highlights. And then the last part of it is really thinking about who gets the credit, because I wanted to just hover over this a little bit at the end. It's not the project at the bottom that gets the tax credit. It is, in fact, an investor in that top of the structure that we talked about earlier. It is a credit over 7 years. It's awarded 5% in the first 3 and 6% in the last 4 over that 7-year period for the 39% total net benefit. Typically, these are institutions like banks, like Truist, like US Bank, others that are looking for investments often to meet their CRA needs or others. The investor pricing is often influenced by their need for the credit in this particular market. So as with other types of programs, in different service areas, you may get different types of pricing. But also I have seen more recently that investors are really thinking about impact in a much more defined way. So there may be types of impacts that each investor is trying to incentivize. So if you're doing something in particular that's part of one of their overall program investment priorities, you may get a penny or more additional in pricing than other projects. Now, this is where we go from 101 to 201. So I won't hover over a lot of these slides, but they're here for you when you are done with the program. They will email you all these slides, and these are some of the more defined. These are some of the more wordy slides. I try not to have them up because otherwise you're just reading instead of listening, seeing the pretty pictures of the different types of programs and projects that we have helped. Really talking more about the 39% credit and how that's realized. And then I think there's one or two more slides. We've talked about this is that statutory definition. Most of you don't really want me to read you the statute, but if you're looking for what in the specific realm you have to meet, these are those more specific criteria. I don't know, Maddie, I think that there's probably no other ones. If you want to flip one more, at the very end, there is some data. So I'll just highlight this for one second and then turn it back to Marty. So the new market allocations by round, there's an organization called the New Market Tax Credit Coalition, where they collect data on all the projects that have been funded. So if you want to see if a project like yours has been funded and we didn't provide an example that looks like it, you can go to that website. They have it broken down by state, by type of funding, by round. And so you can sort of look for, do I see any, if I'm an apple, do I see any apples that are there? Or if not, you are also welcome to just pick up the phone and call us or reach out and ask us whether your project might be a good source. But the New Market Coalition provides all that data based on the different rounds. So please feel free to reach out if you've got any questions. And actually, Maddie, I believe that's what we're doing next, is taking any questions that people may have had.
Yeah, and Laurel, maybe I can add a comment or two just to go on top of what you said. For our clients or anyone listening to this, just take stock of what you're going to be doing over the next few years when it comes to investments, making capital expenditures, planning out where that may be and where you may be adding jobs. And in the New Markets program, earlier is better. It's always great to have a plan. And we're more than happy to talk to you about what locations may qualify, what type of information will be good for us to know. And in some ways, this is a marketing exercise. You want to understand what the community impact is, and we can help articulate that and get that in front of our own CDE, other CDEs out there, so that they may want to consider funding that type of project in the future. And they may even put something like your project into their application as they request the allocation as they go forward. It's just in simplistic terms for people like myself, I like to think about this as a program for our clients that really is a loan to them. It's a principal-free loan, honestly. To the extent they qualify, it is, as Laurel said, it's deploying capital, but it's very cheap capital in the sense that you pay a low interest rate for a period of 7 years, and through a put and call option at the end, ultimately that loan is forgiven. But from a tax perspective, it is picked up as COD income at the end. But maybe just as a last point, in terms of twinning or pairing certain incentives, just due to the fact that you may have looked around and negotiated some state or local incentives, that does not disqualify you from also looking at new markets as well. New markets can be the icing on top of the cake for you as well. So even if, you may have picked a location after you've been potentially negotiating between two from a state credit perspective or some other kinds of incentives, to the extent you're in a qualifying location, it's then worthy of thinking about what more can you then do with the new markets tax credit, in addition to what you might have been planning on doing. Maybe you can add more jobs. Maybe can have better jobs, make it in more facilities. That's the kind of thing that we like to do. So it's both finding capital, and deploying capital, but then also maximizing what you can do with capital after you've done an entire negotiation already. But Laura, quick question to you. What do you see twinned with new markets in the marketplace? How do we combine incentives often?
Yeah, we also got a question in the chat box that's right up that alley, Marty. So
that's good because I didn't read it yet, but that's
yeah.
Right, go ahead.
So new market tax credits can be twinned with a lot of different types of programs. So there are state tax credit programs that often are a great fit. We have seen it with different, so we're working with a client right now on community development block grant funding. That has been twinned with new market tax credits. We've seen historic tax credits. Opportunity zone financing isn't often leveraged through new market structures because of the different timing of those types of credits, but they're often paired side by side. So there are projects that are funded with multiple different types of incentives. And what we typically look for is, are they going to be leveraged through the structure? So are they going to reduce your need for other funding sources to create that $10 million project, or will they be side by side? So your project is really a $15 million project. And so some of the different types of incentives are really paired next to. So we see opportunity zones as more often used side by side. So there will be opportunity zone money that comes into the project, but it's not often that we see that go right through the funding funnel of the new market structure. I have seen it happen once or twice where you can have all the stars align. Historic tax credits are also one of those where you see those either paired directly through the capital stack or side by side. So what I mean by that is it a $10 million project where the historic tax credits are funneling through and it's $10 million of new market tax credits, or is it a $15 million project and of that 10 million is financed with new markets and maybe there's some additional equity that's coming in on the side. So as I mentioned, it is a fairly competitive program. So often if you have a $10 million project, you may not get 100% of that financed. You may have 95% of it financed. Typically, that's the top percentage you like to see. About some direct equity go into a project. When you talk about much larger projects, it depends on how many impacts you're creating. So if you've got a $40 million project, but you're creating 1,000 jobs, then probably you can get, $30 million of allocation, and then you'll have a lot of that money that needs to be available on day one. Some funding sources you just find don't match up terms. The timing used to be, a lot of people tried to find a way to do EB5s. Those are out of favor a little bit now, but those never really matched up quite on the timing aspect of when people are trying to get out of those investments and when you're going to have to stay in for new market tax credits. So what I would say is there's so many different bonds, or another source. I actually have a slide that I didn't put in today that sounds like maybe I should add for future, is all the different sources we've seen as leverage structure, from bonds to EB5 to opportunity zone funding, either through or next to in the same project.
Well, I see one in here, and I think it's a strong yes, but I'll just read it off. It indicates, would this project, would the program be viable for a private university in a place like North Carolina that's a 501c3 that serves underrepresented communities? Education, job creation may be beneficial to the community as a whole. It says, for example, capital project for construction of a new residential hall, academic buildings, etc. I would think yes, but I'll let the expert chime in.
Yeah, so what you're really trying to do is pair up what the community development entities have said they're going to fund within your community. So there are certain CDEs that get funding based on, and I saw another project question about diversity, equity, and inclusion. So if your project, it lines up with the mission of that community development entity and you're in the right service area, then you could get funding for that type of project. So we have, yes, seen funding for different kinds of education, from early childhood ed through charter school, through HBCUs and other types of universities. Typically, though, the question is, what impact are we creating for the greater good, for the low-income community? So if your organization isn't centered around providing impacts to the low-income community, how can you tie that to the low-income community? So, for example, we recently saw an HBCU access funding And they were not just creating a resource for their own students, even though that would be a great use. They also were going to make that community center open to the public. So they're located in a low-income census tract. This was going to be a meeting place and open to others. So the amenities and services they were going to be bringing in weren't just earmarked for just their students, they were for the community as a whole. So that's often how you can bring a broader array of impact into your project, is to think about how do I reach outside of my building to really dig deeply into the community and serve the needs that are there. And then again, doubling down on that question about, we don't often see diversity, equity, and inclusion associated with minority created economic development projects meriting investment. Do we have a case study demonstrating DEI, new market investment? So diversity, equity, and inclusion is one of those really great ways that new market tax credits is overlapping with current sort of funding priorities, but not all community development entities have a historic track record of serving that type of use. So there are some, like, for example, Stonehenge is a community development entity we've worked with. They have historically worked with the Urban League, and they have tracked their minority investment. What kinds of projects are they funding and financing? And so that makes them viable and winnable and to the CDFI to get more money to do those types of projects. What you can't do is turn on a dime in this type of program. Unfortunately, you can't, as a community development entity, just add a new program like saying I'm going to fund DEI projects or other things without having a track record of having done that. So I do see some CDEs funding that type of project. If there's a project in particular you want to talk more about, there are a handful of community development entities that have that as a high priority. I think nonprofit finance funds, Stonehenge, LIF, ASIC, there are some that I think of at the top of my head as being centered around that type of impact. But there are lots of different types of impact that are tracked. And so you really have to measure your project with the types of impact that the community development entities have been funding.
All right. So I think we're coming to the end here. And I would say, short recap, if you're thinking about spending any money where there's going to be some community impact and you're adding a bunch of jobs, please just give us a call. Would you just want to talk it through with you? We can, beyond new markets, give you ideas in terms of like how to get capital for it, but we can certainly comment on new markets and its viability. With that said, this now concludes. Is there one more question coming? Just want to see if there's anything else there. I don't know if you saw anything.
What I would say is just the last plug is this was really about CPE and getting you credits. But the last plug of that is to sort of end where we began, which is the tax advantage group serves all the entities up and down the structure. So we have helped Qualic Bees, those projects receive funding. We know the community development entities that serve the space and what they fund. We work for different community development entities and investors. So we really have touch points into all of those different levels of the program. And so if you're curious, if you want to know more, please reach out and ask us, because we can spend probably 5 minutes and tell you whether you're going in the right direction or the wrong direction, and save you hours and hours of trying to answer these questions for yourself. And you may not, as Marty, you sort of hit on, you may not right now be in that yes category, we need your help. But this was also designed to help you think about, where do you go from here as you're growing your organization? When will you be in a place where this is the right tool? It's not the right tool for every project, but it is the right tool, and it's very beneficial for a lot of people who are trying to get that last piece of an equity investment into their project to make it go in this current environment where we see construction pricing going up so much. So that's my last plug. All right. Or call us if you think you need us, and I'll turn it back to you, Marty.
Yeah, thank you, Laurel. So this was episode 4 in a day of 4 episodes. So thank you, everybody. If we didn't get to your question directly during any of the actual sessions today, we do have the info on who wrote those questions, and we will respond directly back to you on any of the topics, whether it be R&D, legislative updates, cost seg, new markets, or anything else. We absolutely value feedback. With that said, there is a survey at the end. As mentioned, we want to make these things better and better for you. So if you have any feedback, we'll be happy to take it. And just as a reminder, CP certificates are going to be sent within 10 days. to you, along with copies of the recording and other resources. I want to personally thank every client that we had today, the IRS who joined us, Alex Sadler who joined us as well, Laurel, Dan, and Ron, everybody. We couldn't thank everybody. Well, I can't thank you enough for helping put this together. Our marketing team as well did an amazing job. They kept the slides running, and hey, the internet didn't go down all day, so we did okay. So thank you all so much for your participation, and thank everybody at Chair Bekaert for helping out to present this. Thank you so much. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.